Hello, welcome to the June 10th, 2025 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you have not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can submit questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de or simply type your question in the live chat field and we will go through all the questions chronologically as asked. If you don't see an immediate response to your question, we may have questions that are kind of piled up, and we will go through all of the questions in chronological order as they are asked. When asking questions, if it's helpful if you could specify which version of Cubase that you're running. So if it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, or other Steinberg programs, what version numbers, if you're running 12, 13, or 14. Also, which operating system, that information is helpful. We should have an index of all of the topics that are covered on today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field several hours after the live stream ends. And if you wanted to search for topics that were from previous live streams, I believe we have over 39,000 topics. You could go to cubaseindex.com. And we want to thank Jan from Stockholm. We see him as Cubase Index Jan, who's on. We want to thank him for his efforts for creating that website. So you can basically just search for particular topics, and it'll take you to the hundreds of hours of live streams that we've done. We also have two people that serve as moderators. So we want to give special thanks to Jazz Dude and Agent K. They're not Steinberg employees. They just do it to make it a better community experience. And we'll give Jazz Dude a special extra thanks for his efforts with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord site. So it's a wonderful resource for the Steinberg community. If you're looking for different tutorials and links and articles to help you with your Cubase or Steinberg journey, that's a great resource of information. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America. I primarily focus on Steinberg products, and I'm the host today. I'm presenting from United States, just outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. With that, we will go ahead and get started. As we see Dan Gaines on, it just says IMW. All right, we see Stefan checking in from Sweden. We have Jan from Cubase Index, also checking in from Sweden and Stockholm. We see Jazz Dude. We have Uno Memento from Finland, loyal Steinberg user and attendee. And we see Jazz Dude says sound and video okay. So I actually checked the sound this time just to make sure I wouldn't spend the first 2 minutes talking in silence. All right, so we got the artist known as Love. He says, thank you, Greg, for all you do. And he's already hit the like button. We have Fly V checking in from Winnipeg, Vince. We have Marvin Earl checking in from Newport, Rhode Island. Jan from Cubase Index sharing appreciation for the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. All right, and we have Soren checking in from Sweden. Sable Winters from Bay Area, California. We have Milan Badalino checking in from Milan and Sweden. Thanks for being online with us today. We have Martin from Germany, Rick France from the Pacific Northwest. We have Val checking in from Vienna, Peter from Montreal, Ray Camp from the UK. We have Stefano from Italy. Val's drinking some cold brew while learning today. All right, Babel says, hey Greg, I always have the most difficult time trying to change colors of tracks. I feel like it's so finicky. What's the trick? Okay, so let's say if I want to change colors and tracks, so I'll just first, let's just add number of blank tracks. I'll just add, we'll start off. All right, so if I want to change a single track, what you could do is, one is if you come over here, you could click on the alter option key and you can see all of your available project colors just by clicking in this header here. If you're clicking in this header, you could also hold down the alter option key, and if we wanted to make sure I have, so alter option key, you could just kind of click there. Now if we wanted to change multiple tracks at the same time, we could just select all of our channels and we'll see our color tool directly here. So if I want to change all the tracks to a particular color, just select the tracks, select all the tracks that you want to change, and now we could come right over here. You'll see just next to the color tool, so we will select all of our tracks and you'll see the color palette that we could just come right over here, and now we could change the color of multiple tracks simultaneously. So let me know if that makes sense for you. Okay. All right, we see Michael Teams checking in from Weatherford, Texas, where it's a rainy day again. So hopefully Michael could compensate for the rain with virtual ice cream from everyone. All right, we see Bob checking in from Bristol, England. Sable saying hi to Peter from Montreal. All right, Val just says, today I learned that you could save track presets with deactivated VSTs to save so much time. Yeah, so if you want to see that, we'll show that for the benefit of other people. So let's say if we have a track preset, so let's come over here. Let's say if we do like a pad shop. So let's see if we could save not only the track, but maybe the instrument track here. So let's say if we disable this track, so we'll come right over here, we'll disable the track. And now let's save as a track preset. So I will right click. Okay, so we'll call it a pad shop disabled. Now let's come over to my media bay. And we'll go to user presets. So we'll say track presets, VST instruments. So we'll say pad shop deactivate. So we can see that that is deactivated. And let's say if we have this track enabled, but we had like its inserts disabled. Okay, so I'm just going to come right over here, hold down my alter option, and let's save the track with the instrument active but the plugins disabled. So we'll come right over here, save track preset, we'll say pad shop, inserts bypassed. Great, so let's go ahead and drag this particular preset out. So now we can see that the instrument could be enabled and the track inserts can be disabled as well. So you could save with the track disabled with the track enabled and the plugins on the track disabled as presets. Thanks for sharing that, your discovery, Val. All right, Babel asks, whenever I create a new track, the pre-EQ is always enabled automatically. How can I turn this off? Okay. Okay, so we'll just do a new project here. So let's add an audio track. So, it's going to be enabled by default, but it doesn't do anything until you enable the different EQ frequencies here. So while this may be enabled so that you don't have to have like a two-step process, it's not changing anything or taking away any CPU cycles unless you've activated the low cut or high cut filters there. So let me know if that's a problem. All right, wonderful to see Kerwin Young checking in from Atlanta area. Peter, it just says he had a question, but sadly you have to run. He'll ask him Friday or submit by email. All right, wonderful to see Mark Rabin from Montana. Everyone give a big woof to Mark Rabin's dog. Stella. Glad you can make it today, Mark. Michael Teams is granted Jazz Dude 1 gallon of black walnut ice cream for the great Discord service and channel. See, Mark Rabin went out on his kayak and got sunburnt. Hope you had fun. All right, Striker Bay is checking in from Bavaria. Thanks for joining us. Andrew Fox is saying hello from Ireland. I'm going to be going to Ireland. I'll be there next week, at the end of the week. Looking forward to it. Tell me what I should do. I'll be going to Dublin. I think we're going to try to do a day trip to Cliffs of Moher. All right. All right, we have Jan Thony saying hi to everyone. All right, Michael Teams says Mia says woof. We see Dallas LaRue checking in from Las Vegas. Thanks for joining us. All right, and Val's just saying with the disabled plugins that it makes saving templates so easy now and so CPU light. All right, Soren has a question. It says, I want improvement to chord track and chord pad patterns. I want more ready-made patterns and chord progressions to just choose in the chord track and pad patterns being is the chord track and pad patterns being improved on. One of the things that you can do, obviously is, if you have, while there are patterns, people will always want more, but it's also very easy to make your own chord patterns as well. So, anytime that you have a song, so let's say if I open up a project here, so let's say, if you open up an audio file of a song, so I'm going to come here, let's say as we listen to this, and we get this going to the right interface, that would help. Okay. So I'm just going to drag this to a chord track. So I'll say OK. And now what we want to do, so let's say if I want to come over here and save this, okay, so we're going to see my chord pads here. So we see these little, like, these icons here. This is a sign from the chord track. So now I come over here, and now it's my chords from a particular song. And then I could just simply save that as a preset. So any song, even if it's an audio file, I could come over. So let's say with the new project, and I'll just import quick audio file. Okay, so now if I just drag this, so we'll come over here. So let's say, okay, I want to make a new chord track. Drag that song to the chord track. And now again, I could just take that particular song, and now the chords are automatically extracted from the particular song to the chord track. Now, anytime that we want to take any MIDI file, there's, you know, hundreds of different MIDI files that are available if we want to make our own patterns. So let's say if I want to take this piano pattern here, so I could just come over here and say, okay, I like this particular pattern. Then all I would have to do is just take this pattern and drag and drop. And now we could just play the particular pattern that we want. So if we want to just say, okay, now we're going to play the pattern. So it's really easy, I think, to, load up any song, drag it to a chord track, and then populate the chord pads here based on, multiple songs that you could quickly do. So if you want to do like, 10 jazz songs, you could just simply do the chord analysis and save that as a preset, or any MIDI information, you could just drag and drop it to the patterns and then use that as the basis for the patterns. But I'll mention that, people want more, but I think it's easy to populate more chord progressions for the pads as well as different patterns. All right, so we see Tim K joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. His cat buddy is waving hi to everyone. All right, so we see Mark Rabin's over 90 degrees in Montana, and the smoke from Canada has arrived. Good luck, and we hope doesn't persist too long for you. All right, Michael Teams wants everyone to smash the like button. Mark Rabin says he's psyched to be here and out of the sun watching the clip Cubase. All right, reading through. All right, so I see from Mike Braley says, hi Greg, have a new, and then it's kind of beats cut off. We'll see. Okay, so you see continued. Mike Braley says, have a new M4 Mac. Any settings I should change in Cubase to maximize the chords, etc.? Cheers from Boston. So Cubase is set up to already, by the default settings. So if we come over here to your studio setup, the default settings will utilize all the cores. So you don't have to do anything for it to utilize the efficiency and the processor cores on your M4. So everything by default will utilize all of the processing cores without you having to really do anything. Congratulations on your new Mac. Michael Teams has granted my family and myself 1 gallon of peanut butter crunch ice cream. That's very generous. All right, so Mark Raven is sending a meow meow to Buddy and a mini woof to Mia. It's good that our pets get along as well. We see Tiago joining, sending greetings from Brazil. Wonderful to see Brian Sawyer Sr. from Yuma, Arizona. All right, Gareth is joining from Sirius, so that's good. Be our first interstellar attendee. Great to see Charles K. on. All right, see Gareth just says many thanks for the genius space work, Sir Greg. So hope that it makes sense. Let me know if there's anything that you want me to take a different approach on. All right, we see Tim Weinheimer checking in from Mission Viejo. All right, Vishal Dixit asks, what is this about? So this is our Club Cubase live stream. So what we do is people ask questions about their usage of Cubase or how to accomplish something, and we answer it in real time. So it's kind of basically set up for like a live Q&A session. So ask a question, get an answer. Or just known as love. Once everyone hit the thumbs up button, hit the like button. All right, so we have Talarista de Graffiti just saying hello, G. All right, Gulf Coast, Florida men of the Gulf of America saying hello. All right. See, Gulf Coast, Florida man just asking if anyone here is using Cubase 3 on Android. So I have it on my Galaxy phone. All right, so you see Mark Rabin's doing grandparent jam out duty with grandkids. But if Greg wants to elaborate on drum tracks, anything has got to be better than my last attempt. I'll be off and on to study on YouTube. So let me know if it's if you get a chance, Mark, if it's audio or MIDI drum tracks, I can maybe show you some tips. All right, so Bratman Studios at his brother's appointment enjoying the live stream. Thanks for sending your music over to me. Okay, Mark Rabin says 74 people are watching and 32 likes. You guys hit the like button. All right, so we see Gulf Coast, a Florida man ask, I hope we get a similar live video similar to this where Cubase is 3. I've yet to get a new PC, so I have to get Cubase. I've yet to get Cubase, but I'm working with what I have. Yeah, so, when I do the live streams, I could see if there's any possibility of doing it from my phone, but it may not be as friendly as doing it from a computer for all of the live streams. But let me know if you have particular questions on Cubase, and I could help you out with that. All right, so Val has a question. It says I have 2 tracks that I want one track to duck the 50 to 60 hertz with dynamic EQ, and the other deduct 600 and 700 hertz on a first, but it won't let me route them to each other. Only one to another, not both. Okay, so let's take a look, see if we can. All right, so let's see if we get this. Okay, so he says he has 2 tracks, so let me just put in maybe like quick drums with this. I'll do quick tempo detection. All right, let me just. Okay, so let's say we have this, and let me just put in like a quick drum part here. Here, I'll just do an actual percussion. Okay. All right, so let's say we have okay, so let's, right, so we have 2 audio tracks going on. So I want one track to duck the 50 to 60 hertz with dynamic EQ. All right, let me just see if we get some more. All right, so let's say I want this. All right, so you want one track to duck 50 to 60 hertz with dynamic. Actually, let me just try like normal recording here. This might be easier. Sorry, go down that rabbit hole there. All right. All right, so let's say I want the bass here. So we'll take this. And let's put our frequency EQ. Okay, so let's say we want this to be like 50 to 60 hertz. Okay, so let's put this on dynamic. Okay. So say sidechain 2 in is coming from our kick. So let's say we'll come here. So if we just okay, so we got that, and you want the other to duck 600, 700 hertz on the first, but it won't let me. So let's say if we want to come here, let's duck 600 to 700. So I'm assuming let's come here, let's get to the EQ, and we'll get to. All right, so let's say we want to put band 4 on dynamic EQ. So it could be, if it doesn't allow you to set up, it could be just creating a feedback loop. So if it doesn't allow you, so maybe what you could do is come over here, let's duplicate this track. Okay, and on this track, I'm going to take the frequency off. We could send the output of this track to no bus. And now we'll call this our base D. So let's come to the sidechain on this. Activate our sidechain and see, we'll do it for track for input 4. So as we come over here, let's take so you might have to duplicate the track, otherwise you could create a feedback loop. But if we just have that track, and we could send it to no bus, but it still gets sent out. So you might have to do that, otherwise it could create a feedback loop between those two tracks. So let me know if that works for you. Bow. All right, so we see from Soren says, thanks Greg about the chord track / patterns question. All right. Gareth is saying good evening to Brian. All right, John N.K. Inman says, I'm having trouble saving recording beats in the drum machine. How's it done? Also, I prefer Superior Drummer to Groove Agent. Is there a way to use Superior Drummer in the drum machine in Cubase 14? Okay, so when we're starting off with the drum machine and the patterns are two, while they work together, they're kind of independent of each other. So when we come over to the drum machine, we can come over here. So the drum machine is, we think of it as a sound source. So we're going to add a drum track. I'll load up a quick preset. All right, so now we have sounds. So this sound source, now when we added the track, you may have noticed that when we add a track that we could choose for it, when we add a MIDI track or an instrument track or drum track, we have the choice of pattern, event, or a MIDI part. So I'm going to come over here. So right now we have, and when I added a drum track, I added it as a MIDI part. So when we want to actually go to the editor, now I could see all of my different sounds, and I could just come over and say, all right, so we can kind of see our grid here. So I have 16 steps that I chose. We could add more or less. I want to come over here. Let's go to Euclidean. Now I could also just come over here. Let's double the resolution of the step lane. So now I could throw in a couple of all right, and if we want to just throw a couple of bongos in. All right, so now this pattern is playing back through the drum machine. So the drum machine is the sound source, and then we could use this to generate the ideas, and we could send this to any MIDI device. So if I wanted to use this with another drum machine, I don't have Superior Drummer, but you could utilize the same thing. So we'll say, okay, I'm going to add an instrument track. We'll show it with Groove Agent. So I'm going to say, let's create a pattern. So I'm going to load up a kit here in Groove Agent. Okay, so we have, so what you might have to do is, so we can see that since the pattern is open, that I could now come over here and I could see, okay, we're starting at C1, we see this little plus symbol, and now I could just program the sounds in any drum VST. So let's come here. Now, if we wanted to so right now we're utilizing the sounds, and if we're using Groove Agent, and this isn't part of your question, but we could say create the drum map from the instrument, and now all the sounds will populate by name right here. So we could just and if we wanted to randomize number of steps. Now, once we have our pattern created, we can drag and drop directly into our project window, wherever we want to place it. And now, clear my throat. So now when we come over here, I'll just snap that particular pattern to the grid, and we can make copies. So now the pattern, instead of playing from the pattern editor synchronized, will just play directly from the timeline here. Now, if I wanted to edit this in the MIDI domain, all you would have to do is click on one of the patterns here, and we could convert that pattern to MIDI. So now I can edit it in the MIDI editor, or I can edit it in the pattern editor, depending on what is selected. So when you go to add an instrument track, make sure that you just come here and choose the pattern editor. If you don't see anything in the edit section, sometimes it may help to just double click, create an event, and then erase the event, and then you could see the patterns. So let me know if that works for you. All right. Reading through comments here. Brian is saying howdy to Gareth. Okay, so we see from Mark Rabin just says, I've been trying a multitude of approaches, feels vital, sounds okay, but it's like bland, like machines and no human. I varied velocity and brought whole drum mix to reasonable level, please. Okay, so let's say we want to program something that was a little more realistic sounding drums. So let's come over, let's start a new groove agent here. So we'll start with like an acoustic drums and some tips. So velocities are usually kind of key. So let's try a couple of things here. So I'll just load up like a kind of more of a generic acoustic kit. And let's just program and some tips to make kind of program drum sound more realistic. Okay, so if I want to start with we'll come over here. Let's say we just want to, let's program just, and I'll just turn this into MIDI quickly here. All right, so I'm going to, again, just come right over here and say in the routing area, let's extract the drum map from the instrument. So now when we double click, we could see this. All right. So I think there's a lot of little subtle things that we could do to, and drums don't have to be like super complex. Sometimes being a great musician really means that you have the ability to play a lot of great, amazing parts, but you choose not to. It's often kind of so let's say we'll just do kind of one measure here. So I'll put this into a loop. Okay, so let me just get my first kick here so it'll sound normal. All right, so let's say we want to, let's say this is a very generic drum beat. All right, so hi-hats are usually kind of the giveaway. So let's say I want to put in hi-hats here. So I'm not even going to put like a groove on it. Now let's say I want to throw like a little stick on the snare, but I want this to be so like little like stick drags. All right, and let's say I want to take all of these velocities in a hi-hat. I just want to bring them all down a little bit. All right, and I'll adjust my tempo here. So let's say this, I want it to be 108. All right, so I'm going to copy this a couple of times, and I want to do like little subtle variations. So I'm going to glue these together. All right, so let's come over here and say, okay, we'll play. So I want to take out some of the stick, like the snare drags here. And let's take an occasional, let's say at the end of 4 bars, drummers will sometimes, if there's a chord change, they may announce like a hi-hat. So let's come here at the very end. So I take that hi-hat and try like a pedal hi-hat. So we have some of our natural variations. And let's say we'll listen to that last measure. All right, now that's kind of sticking out, so I'm going to bring that velocity down. All right, so we could do some stuff like that, and let's maybe throw in just like another make it maybe like a kick here. All right, so let's say, okay, maybe we don't want the kick there, but we could just kind of throw in maybe even just like little additional hi-hats that are kind of dragged. So little subtle things like that where you do just, you know, maybe like little drags on the snare, you know, playing around with the velocities. All those things can make a big difference in making something sound realistic. So it's not just the same thing that's copied, but a lot of times what always sticks out in like badly programmed drums will be more dealing with like hi-hats and velocity. So, but if you have some drums you want to send over to me, Mark, you could send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Be happy to take a look at it. All right, so you see from Gulf Coast, Florida, man, says that'd be great, man. I'd really appreciate it. I'm going to subscribe. I'm going to use it some more today, and I'll write down questions for the next stream. Yeah, so we do these usually twice a week. All right, so Soren's asking, says, Greg, apparently Steinberg is a sponsor in a song competition, the HOFA song competition. Do you know anything about it? I figure I won't participate because I have too little talent and too weak songs. I don't know much about it. I'm not sure if sometimes some contests are in Europe and not in the United States, so I'm not familiar with it. I could do some research on it, but I think you should always submit a song. Why not? It's a great experience. You could learn from it, and sometimes you may learn that your songs are better than other people's songs, and so it's always a great experience to go through. So. All right, so we see Mark Ravens just continued with his drum. Says working on Groove Agent 5, took the MIDI track, removed snare and bass drum, and re-recorded with the same using a MIDI MIDI controller, and it helped. But I find my accents ain't it. And another thing that you could do that I see a lot of people do, my friend Vince Melmed is good at this. Like if he's doing a drum fill, he'll kind of play along. And so he's going to say, okay, we want to do, and he will just kind of overdub. So he may program the drums on a grid, but he may just choose to, when he's doing a drum fill, and he may just choose to record something like the drum fills without any quantizing on it. And then, tweak those velocities. But sometimes, part of a groove is having something that's straight and something with a groove. And then those things creating a rhythmic tension between it. And you see great drummers who do that, where, maybe the kick and snare are very straight, but the hi-hat is grooving, and that kind of juxtaposition, that tension, that rhythmic tension between a hi-hat that's groove swinging and the kick and snare that aren't, is always interesting. But and also just kind of play in some parts live as well, just to kind of give it a more spontaneous feel. All right, we see Jazz Dude's kind enough to post the link to the HOFA contest. All right, so Drums Clark just says, hello, Greg. I imported a Dorico project in Cubase 14 Pro. The imported tracks have no sound. Yeah, so currently I don't think that it carries over all the assignments for the instruments because there's still differences in how the two programs deal with articulations. So I think we'll see that, moving where that will be consolidated between the two programs, but currently it's to get the data in so that you could, easily reassign sounds and, have those tweaked more in the Cubase environment as well. All right, so we see Mark Raven says, ultimately I find that when he starts with drums, his songs are way better. When I try to bring drums to a song later in production, that it's not as easy. All right, so Gareth is saying, rest in peace to Sly Stone. So, yeah, so many great records. Remember my friend Bob Welch, who was in Fleetwood Mac right before. He was the guitarist who quit so that Lindsey Buckingham could join with Stevie Nicks, and telling me that he was in a soul band before, and he got and lost in the battle of the bands to Sly Stone. So he's like, it was well deserved. All right, sorry, Chatfield jumped. All right. All right, so we have Chibable from South Germany. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we have Randy from Radar, the band, checking in from Dallas, Fort Worth. All All right, so wonderful to see Daniela on from Bochum, Germany. Thanks for joining us today. It's Da Vinci Girl. All right, Gareth says he has to try the pattern editor out with maybe addictive drums too. All right. Captain Energy Music wishing a happy Tuesday to everyone. All right, Gareth is saying my beat is the new beat for Happy Tuesdays. All right, Nikki Duncan asks, hello Greg, is there a way to make a sampler with multiple samples and round robins to make an instrument? Thanks again. So if you wanted to, if you wanted to do an instrument, so let's say, so the sampler track is dealing with a single sample, but if we use the Groove Agent, so I'm going to use Groove Agent SE, we'll do it as a MIDI part here. And I want to drag a sample in. So let me just. All right, so let's say if I want to come over. All right, so let's say if I want to take these samples here. So I will select these in my media bed. I'm going to drag them to a pad here. So I could, and right now there will default to velocity settings. So if I hit it lower in a pad, we'll see this sample. If I hit it kind of the lower mid. Now if I wanted these to do round robin, I would just simply select here. So now anytime that I would hit a particular sample, it would automatically, let me just turn this on here so you can see. So whenever I hit, it's just going to do kind of a round robin for that. And if we have, now let's say we wanted to work with a, something that was kind of more tonic, like something that we would play melodically. What we could do is I would just come over here. All right, so let's say I want to do like a bass, and this bass is going to be a pitch of B. So I'm going to drag this over here to, let's say, B. So if I want to come over here, I could select this and then hit pitch. And we could say key range. So I'm just going to select. Okay, so I'm going to set my key range. So we'll say B1 through B2. So now, so this could do round robins. I could do round robins on each of these particular samples as well, but now I could take one particular pitch and be able to kind of play it chromatically, and then this we could choose whether we wanted these two like as we go to the main area, whether we want these to be round robin, to be layered, random, or random exclusive, which means that it won't repeat. Like it'll be random, but it won't be any repetition, so you don't have the same sample twice. Or if you want it to be just based upon velocity, and if you wanted to edit the velocity values here. So a lot of that work you could kind of do in Groove Agent. Let me know if that makes sense for you, Nikki. All right, wonderful to see John Barry checking in from the English Riviera. Thanks for joining us. Reading through comments. Let's see. Best example of perfect drums equals John Bonham, according to Jazz Dude. He did play some great parts. And Gareth is adding Jeff Porcaro and Pablo Vasquez. All right, see more discussion of the feedback loop on sidechaining. Mark Rabin just says, I'm way too embarrassed to send you anything, Greg, but sincerity and your genuine empathy is noticed and appreciated. Yeah, please do. It'd be, it would be, it would be a joy for me to kind of help you out and see, exactly what you're working with. And I spent many years, like why I try to be, like help people out. And yeah, I always remember buying my first drum machine, which is an Alesis HR16, and at the store got a great demo of it, and I hardballed the guy down on the price. Then I went home and I couldn't program anything and didn't make any sense. I went back to the store the next day, tried to get help, and after I ground the guy down on the price, so I had to sit there and learn how to do it. So I always remember that frustration. So, but yeah, please, Mark, send me a project with the drum part, and I'd be happy to take a look at it. All right, Bondrude asks, how do I align the start of one event to a specific note within another? For example, I'm making a note on track 2 start at the exact beginning of the third note on track 1. Okay. All right, so let's say if I have let me just get like a MIDI pattern over here. All right, so let's say I have this event here, and I want like this drum pattern here to start on the this particular note here. So if I just move my cursor right to the beginning of the notes, I'm going to take my snap off by hitting the letter J or clicking on this icon here. Let's move this right to the very start. I'm going to move the cursor, and then if we want to come over, so let's move the cursor right to there. I will. So now I could say, is it Command L or Control plus L will now move that particular start of that event to the beginning of that cursor. Now let's see if we go into the in-place editor, Control Shift I, and if I move, let's see if we do, if it's snap to events, I don't think that's going to do. Yeah, so let's try turning this off. All right, so let's say all right, so if this is in event. So if I open this up to Command-Shift-I, I could also, and let's see if this is set to event, that as I move the event, we could have it automatically snap to the beginning or end of the notes like this. But let's see if I have that set to grid. So if we have it set to grid, it's not going to do that. But if we open up, so if you want to have the MIDI event here, you could hit Control or Command plus Shift plus I, set the grid to events, and then so if I come over here, I could just move the start of these events. Let me make this a little larger so it's easier to see. So now as I go to move, again, we select events here for our grid type. I could snap to the beginning or to the end of the MIDI notes, just because we have those events open in the in-place editor. So again, Control or Command plus Shift plus I. So open that up to the part that you want to snap, set the snap type to events, and then you could just freely move. If you don't want to do that, you can move the cursor to the start of the event. So say I want this event to be here. Select that event, hit Control or Command plus the letter L, and that will move the selected event to start at the cursor position. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Great. Great. So I'm seeing Gareth giving some ideas on routing, about employing a group. All right. All right. So DaVinci Girl doesn't seem so up or excited about the Hoffa competition. All right, wonderful to see Benny checking in from Sweden. You see Kerwin, sad that Sly passed away. Val's new drinking game is take a shot every time my chat jumps. Might be too drunk by the end of the live stream. So FlyV's just asking, what's your way of creating the length of tracks, different parts, Greg? So I don't think, like, if I'm working on a project that I'm necessarily thinking of like a fixed thing for a length of an event. I would generally, sometimes I may, like if I wanted to move all these together easily and know that I didn't want them separated, I may, glue them together. I usually, most musical patterns, the vast majority of musical patterns will be in groups of 8 or groups of 4, increments of 4 measures. And a lot of times it just kind of feels very natural, 8 measures, that there's a change, that something happens. And it's maybe not necessarily a good thing, but it's something that's been used so much that it sounds atypical when events, for most pop music, I would say when events aren't in intervals of 4, Some people, I know I've seen some writers always try to do 5 or 7, and then when they're kind of doing it for the sake of doing something that's not 4, it may kind of throw people off. As a musician, I always liked when bands could throw in like a 5/4 measure or a 3/4 measure just randomly and not have it sound like it was a 5/4 or 3/4 measure. So I liked songs, and I always liked playing songs that maybe you had to put a little bit of effort into learning, and that made me appreciate the songs better. It may not have been better received by someone dancing on the dance floor if all of a sudden something changed a measure early than what they were expecting. So I don't have any kind of preset notions of lengths for different parts, but let me know if that's kind of what you're thinking of, Vince. All right, so we have Bo Eklund checking in from Copenhagen. Hoy Boy sending greetings from Los Angeles. Just saying, hope you're well. So doing great. Hoy Boy just asked, is there any way to make the magnifying glass tool temporarily pop up while holding down Option and Shift? So there isn't a modifier key that immediately switches. I know some people, I think, the one modifier with this is just going to be, the fact with the selection tool, that if you hold down the Alt, that we could split without having to access the scissors. But, you can just, if we come over here, we just see if there's the, if you hit the 5 key, you could just come right over here and zoom and double click and then just kind of right tap, and then that way you could go immediately back to your object selection tool. But there isn't a modifier key. I mean, some people will, like the modifiers are going to be kind of G and H, but you could also just, if you use your mouse scroll wheel, so instead of having to switch tools, like if we're here, we could just scroll. So if I hold down my control or command key, we could zoom horizontally. If I wanted to hold down the shift key plus the control or command key, we could zoom vertically just using the mouse scroll wheel. So if you wanted to be able to zoom without changing tools, you could do that just by using the scroll wheel and the modifier key, all while maintaining the selection tool. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so you see Mark Raven says, Greg, you're so kind, I will send something. Sorry in advance. We were all there. So there's not, you just, we were all at that point. So there's, nothing to feel bad about at all. It's like no one figured out how to just look at a book and start reading. My wife claims that she did that. Okay. All right, wonderful to see John Costigan checking in from Kenosha, Wisconsin. Hope you're well. We see Roland Stuff checking in from Sussex, England. Says, I hope you and everyone are well. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see from Nick Saya, so great to see you on. Says Greg, how do I just get the chords attached to show in a score if I only want a lead sheet with chords? Okay, so let me just come over here. All right, so I'm going to, let's say I'll take this particular, let me just revert this quickly here. All right, so say I have a chord track here. So let's say, okay, I wanted to populate the chords. I'm going to come over here. Let's add an instrument track. All right, so around the part, I'm just going to hit the letter P. I'm going to double click here. We'll call this lead sheet. Now what I want to do is to double click, and we're going to create an empty part. Now when I hit go into the score editor, our chords are automatically laid out for us. So what we could do is just simply, once we have the chord pattern, create an empty part for the length, and then if you have the chord track there, we come over, and now the chord track will automatically be populated, and you could make your own lead sheet just like that. So create an empty event and then open the score editor, then you could print that out just that easily. Great to see you on, Nick. All right, so we have Christina checking in, saying hello from Poland. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so we see Nick just saying he only wants the chord symbols to show. All right. Hoy Boy just says thanks for your help. You're welcome. All right, Pertti Komenen is checking in from Finland. All right, Audi and Lee just says hello from Austria. Thank you for the great content. All right, great. Glad it's helpful. All right, let me jump to a question that was mailed in advance. All right, so we had a question, how to connect existing send effects to newly added tracks automatically. Okay, so let's come over here. Let's get to new project. We're going to create empty. All right, so let's say I have, let's add some effects tracks. So let's say, okay, we have shimmer. I want to add, let's say, studio delay. Let's add a plate reverb. Okay, and let's add a coarse effect. So we'll add one more effects track. So we're going to have like 4 different effects tracks. Okay, so when we go to add an audio track, so let's go ahead and add an audio track, and we want to have these 4 effects ends automatically added to the particular track. So when I select this audio track, we open up the editor, we can see that these 4 effects ends are pre-populated. Now there is a preference for this. So if we go under preferences or settings to VST, we could say connect sends automatically for each newly created channel. So I'm going to turn that off. So I don't think that's on by default. So now let's say I remove this particular track. So if you want to build a template easily, let's add a couple of audio tracks here, and we take a look. And when we open those up, we don't see that those sends are populated automatically. So if I go to my next track, let's say we go to audio 1, those sends aren't added, but now when I go to enable that preference, so again, go to preferences or settings under VST, and you'll see Connect sends automatically for each newly created channel. So I'll turn that on, and now when I go to add newly created tracks, and we go to their effect sends, that the effect sends are populated for the tracks that we just added, 3 and 4. So let's come over here. So we can see that this track that was added before that preference was enabled doesn't have those pre-assigned. These 2 tracks that were added afterwards will have these assigned, and you just simply need to turn it on. And this bottom one was added before. So again, come over here to your preferences or settings, and Windows platforms can be under the edit menu, to VST, and Connect sends automatically for each newly created track. All right, let's see if we have some more questions. All right, so we see Gerald Ely joining from Martinez, California. All right, let me go to next question that was mailed in. All right, see, hello, Greg, please. What is the best way to remove artifacts from stems? So I'm not sure if, let's take a look. Maybe it's going to be, let me just take a look if it's going to be artifacts, like if you've done an unmixing. I'm not sure if it's stems that were unmixed from a particular song. Let me see if we come over here. All right, so let's say in this song I've already kind of unmixed it utilizing spectral layers. So let's come over to my control room volume here. So when we so let's say if I drag my vocals out here, so as we kind of work with this,
maybe I'd say things a different way. There's a parade that's inside of your soul.
now as you're working with this, there may be like some artifacts overall, and what you could do is just come over here. So when we're doing this right now, we're kind of just working kind of with almost like a temporary state of the audio file. And so what you could do is just come over here, and if you go to your audio menu, you could just choose to bounce selection. And now that this is a separate audio file, so we're going to double click here. We could see that we're going to have this is a separate audio file. And then if you wanted to get rid of some of the artifacts at that point, if you even wanted to take that particular file and let's go to your extensions, then you could go to spectral layers again and be able to kind of do, you know, the frequency based editing right here. So as we want to work directly with So now, so if we wanted to do,
took me forever, sorry. There's time to do all that needs to be done. Not at an age when the old is too old.
so at that point you could just choose to do further spectral editing if needed, and then you could at that point be able to manipulate even kind of further detail or just kind of do editing on the actual audio files that were originally unmixed. So let me know if that's the stems that you're kind of referring to. All right. All right, Wismos asks, this question, hello Greg, what's the easiest way I can record audio from VST instruments? All right, so that's good. And we'll just open up a VST instrument here with the new project. All right, so let's say we'll just do like a Hallian Sonic here. And let's all right, so say we'll just load up an etude here. So let's say all right, so what we could do in Cubase, so let's say, okay, we have our Hallian Sonic here. I'm going to add an audio track. Now, in its audio input, if we kind of scroll down, we'll see our track instruments here. And we see, okay, this is the Hallian Sonic 01. So I'm using that as the input. So if I wanted to record the MIDI and audio simultaneously of the instrument, so now if I want to just come over here, so I'm just setting the instrument as the audio input right there. So let's come back to, so now as I come over here, so right now we recorded the audio and the MIDI simultaneously. So if we just want to come over here, so anytime that you have an instrument that's added in, so if we add a retro log or any VST instrument, we can come over here. Let's go to add our audio track, and for the inputs, you'll see under, and you may see, you know, connect to bus, and then you'll see track instruments, and then you could just choose to have the audio output as the input for the audio track. So you don't have to record the MIDI if you don't want to. You could just capture it directly as audio, but you could record the MIDI and audio simultaneously at once. And then if you want to link these two together so that they're always, you can now come over and hit Control or Command plus the letter G. And now when I move one, the other will move correspondingly, so they're kind of stuck together. And if we want to ungroup those, we could hit Control or Command plus the letter U for ungroup. So we see this little icon in the upper right hand corner that would indicate that those particular events are grouped, and we don't see an icon, it can be ungrouped. All right, next question. Can I record audio from internet, for instance, YouTube to audio track in Cubase? So a lot of times this could depend upon your audio interface. So I'm using a Steinberg UR interface, and the Steinberg UR interface is set up where we have like one output for the DAW and one for streaming. So let's say if I go to YouTube, so we'll come over, let me just open up a web browser. Okay, so let's say we want to just play. Okay, so I want to take this output and I'm going to send my system audio out to the streaming music. Okay, now I want to add an audio track, and on this I want to say we're going to do our streaming left right stereo. So I'm going to add a stereo track. Okay. And we're going to call this from YouTube. So, and a lot of audio interfaces have something similar. So I'm going to place this into record. All right, and let's go ahead and start playing this.
You know, maybe throw in a clap sample. It's all just super easy to do and so much fun to mess around with. Okay, so this is my Organic Sounds custom kit. We've got a collection of, sounds from nature.
All right, so let's say we stop playing YouTube, we stop playing this, and now the audio from YouTube.
You know, maybe throw in a clap sample. It's all just super easy to do and so much fun to mess around with.
It's been captured directly into Cubase. So it's really more of a function of like loopback capabilities of your particular audio interface. But if like the Steinberg UR series or AXR, you could just come right over here and do this loopback so that it's very easy to capture audio from other sources. So most of that's going to be related to a particular most of that's going to be related to the particular audio interface drivers. Okay. Gerald Ely is just asking Greg, is it okay to upgrade to Mac OS Sequoia now? So yeah, I don't think there's any problems. I think it came with my computer. Let me just check. So I think I'm running 15.5. Yeah, so I've been running it ever since I've had this computer. So there's no problems. Make sure all your hardware and your plugins are compatible, but Cubase should be fine. All right, wonderful to see Jesse Carmichael on. Be our celebrity attendee today. Says, hope you and the family are great. All's well out there. Curious if you got a recommendation for the best Stream Deck mobile app profile to check out. So I know that there was one, like a commercial one, I think I purchased for like $30. I actually kind of made my own, and I think, and I see lots of composers, utilizing kind of, Hans Zimmer kind of probably started with like a touchscreen technology. I think he actually originally started with like almost like a digital cash register that would mimic keyboard shortcuts. I think it's always great to customize it for exactly your particular workflows. I found that the one I purchased for myself, and I made one earlier on, I think when Cubase 12 came out with the MIDI remote system, where I went through each of the different menus, and every single menu, so you could click on a button and go to your audio menu and say, okay, I want to go to processes and silence. So everything was kind of laid out mimicking the menu structure so that you wouldn't have to go menu diving. So I made one of that. I haven't updated it for new functions in 13 and 14, but I kind of liked building my own, and you could start very small and simple and just kind of add to it organically as your workflow progresses. So I would say anytime that you go for a mouse function, anytime that maybe you find yourself menu diving, like while you're doing it, while you're in the middle of it, to just kind of build your Stream Deck profile. It's like, I don't want to have to go here again into this. I'm going to set up a button and label it how I want to see it and I want it to be organized into this folder for, articulations or quantizing. So I think it's best, I found the ones that, I tended not to want icons because, when I did my menu based system, what I actually did was, I didn't use any icons so that we could see everything here, because it's hard sometimes to distinguish between different icons. So I found a lot of the commercial ones relied a lot on icons, and I may just wanted to switch between, and just see the description. So I think that you can make the description. So I would, as you're kind of working on it, just anytime that you go for a menu, anytime you go maybe for a keyboard shortcut, just to, as you're organically working, that in that way you could set up the Stream Deck profile to work exactly for your particular workflows. And you may say, oh, I'm here, I want to be able to, undo. So I would put if I was in an editing area, I would put undo and redo as extra buttons, because that way I wouldn't have to go back and forth between different functions. So where it kind of made context sensitive sense. So I wasn't so happy with the one I purchased, and it could take a little while to do, but I think the effort for the improvement in the speed of your workflow is worth it. And hope you're doing well, Jesse. I'll check, see if you guys are going on tour this summer. Hope you and your family are doing great. See, Michael Teams is welcoming back Audi and Lee from Austria. Just saying he's glad he made it. Glad that they made it. All right. All right. Bondrude asks, says, I'm a very beginner. Is there any way to create your own sounds in Cubase? By example, what would be the best way to create your own leitmotifs like Mario Brothers to add in your melody? The best tool? So it could be, I consider leitmotifs not necessarily a sound, but maybe almost like an arpeggiator of some kind. So let's say if I come over here to Retrolog, let's just load up. Okay, so let's take that particular sound, and if you haven't played around with some of the MIDI inserts, you could really kind of check out like Apache. So, and I'm probably ignorant of like Mario Brothers music, so I apologize for that, but maybe now I could just kind of hold a chord down, and let me just show this. If we go to Alt or Option plus K, and now I'll come here. And as we add, so, maybe as you kind of come over here, could do kind of instant arpeggios, and we could choose where we want these to be kind of up or down, so or to be completely random. Now there is kind of, and that's like a more simple one, but another MIDI insert that you could do is also utilizing our Apache SX, which will give you more presets. So if we go to our MIDI inserts, we can now just come over here to our Apache SX, and now when we do this, we could actually take like a sequencer part, and we could use different presets. So we say, okay, I want it to come over here, and so if we have, let's say, more of a guitar, you know, we can come over and just so let's say we'll come over. All right, so say I have my T guitar preset here, and so I go to play chord. All right, so now when I come over, let's go to like the MIDI inserts here, and if we get to like our Apache SX, there's going to be different, so say we want eighth notes, so there's different kind of like factory presets that you could come over and just so there's like different arpeggios that you could use to kind of get ideas started with lots of very creative presets. And with the Apache SX, if you wanted to take like an existing pattern here, so let's say, okay, I had this, we could drag and drop a MIDI part, and now that MIDI part could actually be the basis for the pattern, and that could be used for the arpeggios. So that may be but maybe if you give me more of a sense of Mario Brothers music, just sorry for my ignorance, I might be able to help some more. All right, Exubes-san says, regarding Dolby Atmos, can you explain how to activate it? Okay, so let's take a look. All right, so we're doing, let's see if I have this in my recent list. All right, so when we're dealing with Atmos, we want to make sure that your sample rate is set to 48K in the project. So if we go to Shift plus S or your project setup, so make sure you're at 48K, and we want the audio interface. So when we come over here, go to your audio interface, go to your studio menu, to studio setup, and make sure that your buffer is set to 512 samples. All right, so now let's say I want to take this guitar part. Thank Gareth for supplying a guitar part here for us. And if we want to get started doing Dolby Atmos, all we would have to do is just kind of come over here and let's get to your project menu, and you'll see ADM authoring. Okay, so we can say our format is going to be for Dolby Atmos. We'll go to the setup assistant. All right, and most of these things, just check these items here. This will do kind of the bed and create different routings for you. So if we are, so this will open up our renderer for Dolby Atmos. If we are listening with headphones, we could, and this is where we choose kind of our down, this is where we will choose our down mix preset. So if we're listening, monitoring with headphones, what we could do is just say we want to listen to binaural. Okay. All right, so now when I go to this particular track and we go to the panner and we double click on the panner, we can see that we now have kind of our surround panner, and I'm going to click on this little icon here, and this will kind of give us our height. So as we come over here, I'll just do a quick automation. So let's say I'm going to start kind of at the front center here. If you have headphones on, you may hear this binaurally. So now it sounds like it's behind us. All right, so now and we can adjust our height. All right, so now let's just put that, we'll select this event and just kind of put it on a quick loop. So now we could kind of basically do that for all the tracks in your project. And do all of their placement. You could have your effects. If you have the headphones on, you're probably hearing that kind of binaurally. And then when you want to actually, and let's say if you have a 5.1 monitor set up, you could just select it for your 5.1. If you have 714, you could select it for, for your monitoring setup. The vast majority is going to be done directly on binaural. So that's where most people are going to be listening to it. Now to deliver this, we would just go to like your ADM authoring from the project menu, and then we could choose to export your ADM file directly from there, and then that's what you could deliver for all of your different delivery formats for listening to your immersive projects. All right. All right, so we see Alti and Lee says do audio recording exclusively, acoustic instruments and vocals, everything going through microphones, plus using Wavelab for pre-mastering. All right. All right. Yeah, so you see from Jesse Carmichael, it says new Maroon 5 albums out around August and U.S. tour in October and November. Yes, I saw online that there's a new record coming out for you guys, so excited for you. All right, so we see Lawrence from Barn Door Recording. It says, hello from the land of the mouse, heading to Infocom trade show tomorrow. So yeah, for those who aren't familiar, Infocom, which is a big kind of live audio, installation audio trade show, is going on tomorrow in Orlando. Please stop by the Yamaha booth. You can say hi to all of my colleagues, pretty much everyone from my group except one person I think is at the show. So I've been Yamaha's been putting a lot of work and a lot of effort into the booth, so stop by, say hi for me, and I hope you have a good time at the show. All right. All right, so we see from Bratman Studios, says, hey Greg, Rick here, thanks for the reply. I had a thought. I noticed that there's a lot of programs that allowed share working within the app. Does Cubase Pro 14 have any capabilities of remote recordings? So if you wanted to do remote recording, Cubase was actually the first program to do this. I think it was maybe Cubase 6. So if you go to the VST Cloud, you can go to the VST Connect SE that comes with Cubase, and what this will allow you to do is basically you could allow you to remotely record someone. It's a peer-to-peer connection, and what that's going to allow you to do is to, someone could basically, so once you launch your VST Connect inside of Cubase, someone could download a free version for Mac or Windows, and I think it's $4.99 for iOS. And you could see a video connection between the two performers. So it's a peer-to-peer connection. So it's just one-on-one. The music goes out of Cubase to the performer. It automatically compensates for their latency. You could control their audio interface. And they could track directly into your system. It'll record it as a FLAC file, which could be then converted to it's a lossless compressed audio file, but you could record people remotely directly right inside of Cubase. And if you need to do more than 2 tracks, you could get the VST Connect Pro, and that would allow you to do up to 16 tracks. And if you don't have the internet bandwidth to do that, you could record the 16 tracks and then download it in the background to have the full resolution audio files. So, see Charles K just says that the binaural recording sounded great in his headphones. So. All right, so we see Lawrence will say hi to my colleagues at the Yamaha booth. See Bratman Studio just sending a tip to Mark Rabin for MIDI drums. Says I'm using a combo drums triggered by my master keyboard, my Roland kit, and whatever cool samples. I also go into the editor and quantizing portions of my playing. All right, wonderful to see Balsa checking in from Montenegro. Thanks for joining us today. All right, Bratman Studio just says, Greg, in recording, is there a lot of latency? So there are 2 things that can really contribute to the latency as we are recording. So the most obvious one will be the buffer size. So when I come over, let's go to your studio menu to studio setup, and we go to the control panel, we could see the buffer size here. So this will be 512 samples. So depending on your sample rate, that will be roughly, when we look at our latency, we go to your audio system. So that gives me like 12.8 milliseconds. So that's kind of like talking to someone 10 feet away. That's the latency. So a lot of people can work fine at that latency. Now, the one thing that can cause a lot of latency is when we go to add a recording. So let's say, and we have plugins on. Now, when we go to Cubase here, one of the things that we could have in our channel strip, we go to setup sections, is a latency monitor. Okay, so we see, so I see from Bratman Studio, says in recording, is there a lot of latency? And he means over the internet. So what will happen when you're recording over the internet, just to complete this thought for people. So your plugins that you have on this can induce latency as well. So as we are working, we could see that we could have latency. So if I come over here, let's say to my inserts on a particular track, and let's say like the vocal chain is kind of a heavy latency plugin. So when we come over and we start adding different plugins, we could see that, let's do a multi-band compressor, and we could see kind of what the latency value is here based on plugins. But if we come over, and one of the things that we can do to mitigate latency during tracking is just to put on if we enable the constrained delay compensation, that we could actually bypass particular plugins. So we could see kind of what the latency is on the system. Now, I guess Rick's true question that I misunderstood was how to deal with latency during the live recording. So it's going to be compensated for. So when we go to, let's say we'll create the VST Connect. Let me just set up a Q mix here in my connections. All right, so when we come over here, let's create our VST Connect. All right, so now once we see this, once we come over, we could search for the person that we want to work with. And at this point, when we hit record, there will be latency, and the latency could be determined by the distance. So if you're recording someone who's 2 miles away, that latency could be less than someone who's in a different continent. Now when you hit record, and the latency is automatically compensated for, so when you hit record, you'll notice that the record is going to be delayed. So when you hit record, it's not going to be instantly recording, because what's going to do is it's going to send the signal out via a Q-mix in your control room. That Q-mix gets sent out to the musician. Their latency of their audio interface is then determined, and it's automatically calculated so that when you hit record, it may be like a quarter of a second, but when you hit record, there'll be a slight pause at the beginning, and then it will record and do all of the latency compensation for you. So it's automatically handled, but you'll notice the latency when you initiate the record, because when you initiate the record process, that's going to take time for that whole path to come back, but it's really imperceptible to the performer. So what they hear is always in sync to what they're performing, and then it's recorded directly into your system perfectly in sync. So, all right, we see Gareth is going for dinner time. And with the VST Connect, we always recommend that you use a wired internet connection, because the a Wi-Fi signal can fluctuate a lot in its speed, depending upon other areas as well. So. All right. All right, so we see Audi and Lee just says latency. Isn't it possible to get around latency in Windows via ASIO? That option doesn't exist for Mac OS. So we could say that the core audio is very, very similar to ASIO, and may have looked to ASIO for guidance and inspiration. So ASIO is a driver architecture developed by Steinberg that basically bypasses the driver architecture offered in, and currently it's in the Windows operating system. Because it's, when you're playing back various sounds or playing back a video file, the latency isn't super critical. But when you're using a DAW, so what the ASIO driver does is it basically bypasses the audio routing for the operating system for the driver and has a direct driver so that we could minimize latency. Now, there's always going to be latency in a system. So even if you have an SSL or a Neve console going from track to track, there will always be latency on the system. But it's often hard to determine what the latency is. Playing your guitar going into an amplifier, there's latency. It's often just not measured. So ASIO drivers can, and on the Windows platform, and core audio drivers on the Mac OS platform can minimize the latency so it's not so high. But there's our contributing factors such as plugins, like during that, and when you're monitoring with plugins with a lot of latency, that's when you may hear the effects of latency, and that's outside of the particular outside of the audio interface driver, but just what's going on in the project. So ASIO can minimize latency and a core audio can minimize latency. But if you're doing a lot of plugins, each of those plugins can contribute to latency. And if you have a lot of plugins spread in your project, the latency of your project on playback may be higher than you would expect. So. All right, next question. Hi, Greg. Can you explain the project key setting related to chord track, chord pad, scale assistant, pitch correcting, etc.? Okay. All right, so let's come over here. Let's say we'll revert this project. Okay, so we have our chord track. So let's say I have a piano part here. And let's say we're... All right, so I want to now create a chord track from the events. All right, so we did this, and we see that it's determined that our song is in the key of G major. So pretty safe guess here. Looking at the chords. All right, so how does this relate to a lot of different editing aspects? So let's take a look at it. All right, so this is our project key. Now, if you don't see the project key, you might just have to click right here on this icon in the chord track. So it could be hidden, and some people always want to, say, maybe I'm in G Mixolydian or whatever. So when we come over here, we could audition kind of our chords. So let's say I want to go to the grand. Now, if you are frustrated that you want to change the key and it's not allowing you to, all you'd have to do is come over here and disable automatic scales. And then you could double click and set your scales accordingly here. So you can say, okay, I want it to be in G Dorian instead, whatever. So we could, or we'll say F Dorian and have the same. So when we want to come over here, so if we have that set to automatic scale. So now how does this relate to doing editing in the project? So if I'm in my piano roll editor, we could base the colors on different aspects. Now there's a scale assistant. Now the scale assistant could determine the scale, doing an analysis of the events. And we could also just say use the chord track. So now we're using our chord track as the basis, so we don't have to manually define or do an analysis of our piano part. Now when we look at colors, we could say, let's go to colors of our scales and chords. All right, so we can see that when we come over here, we could go to our setup, and we could see that the pitch is not green, means that this is within the scale. And we can see this color, and we could change these colors as we see fit. This color means that it's within the chord. This color means that the pitch is not in the current color, chord, or the scale. So now when I look at particular notes, we could come over here and just say, okay, when I move a note, let's say we're in the key of G, and I move this to a D sharp or an E flat 3, that we get a different color here because that's not within the chord, or it's not within the scale. So if I move this to an E natural, you see that we get a different color of green, indicating that this is within the scale but not within the chord. So we could have kind of different colors based upon those conditions. So we could see exactly which chords are, which notes are within chords. Now, if you're not totally super comfortable with music theory, which a lot of people, we could also do pitch visibility settings. So if I want to look at my pitch visibility settings, you can say I want to show only the pitches within the score, within the scale. So whatever note I draw in here will work. I think I just drew in Stairway to Heaven. All right. So let's say, or if we want to show only the pitches that are being utilized in the scale. So if you want to only put in notes that were in G major that was derived from the chord track scale, then we could show only those particular notes. Now, when let me just look at, all right. So when we go to our chord pads, so, we could just come over here to chord pad. So I have this set up as I created a chord pad preset that was just like for C major scale. So let's say if I come here, I want this to be, let's make this a B diminished chord. So now these are independent chords that aren't tied to the scale. But again, as we showed earlier, I could come over here and say, hit this icon right here. It almost looks like 3 symbols, 3 stacked things, and this will take the chords from the chord track and the scale. So let's say if we come over here, and that will automatically come here. And if we wanted to transpose, I could say, okay, now I wanted to transpose from G major, and I want the tonal key to be E major. So we could just kind of come right over here, and we could change the particular keys and modify that, but that isn't extracted. The root key isn't derived from the scale. So those will function independently. Now when we want to utilize pitch correction, so let's come over here to our Very Audio. And so if we wanted to do our pitch correction, so we'll open up Very Audio, and we want to change our color scheme again based on the scale and pitch. So now we could see that the green notes are good. So if I want to come here, but if I moved a particular note, let's say to an orange or reddish kind of color, as we listen to it, we can see that's going to be a bad note. So we could see visually just by the color what notes will work, which notes are going to be in the chord, which notes are within the key. And again, we would just have to kind of come over here and set that based on the scale and chords right there. So we change our color options for Very Audio. So those will be consistent from the key editor to Very Audio, so you could quickly determine which notes are out of key, which notes are in key, which notes are in the chord that are currently going on. So let me know if that makes sense for you. All right. All right, great to see Matt Elston joining. And he's quickly received 1 gallon of lemon meringue pie ice cream. All right, so we see home DJ and Wes. It says gracias desde España. All right. All right, Gareth is making potato hash veggie mess for dinner. All right. All right, Michael Teams wants people to whack the like button if you haven't done it already. Gareth says he's always mixing his Lydians. He's always mixing his Lydians. All right, Balsa asks, question, when we select and activate a sidechain track, what does the -12 dB mean next to the pre-post fader button in the sidechain pop-up window? Okay, so all right, so let's say we want to sidechain this, and we want to see if we could. Right, so I'll just create kind of a quick sidechain scenario here. All right, so let's say we have kind of a quick sidechain here. So I want to take like sidechain this synth sound down from this. So I'm going to put on this particular track an insert. So we're going to come right over here and say, okay, let's do our dynamics. We'll just go to compressor plugin. So I'm going to now activate sidechain. And then when we see activate sidechain, we're going to say, okay, we want this. And let's make it kind of an obvious sidechain. Okay, so now when we do this, so we could have that kick kind of pop out. Now, why you may see that, you know, it's -12 when we see this is because what this is doing is it's sending this track and it's sending the sidechain out from an effect send. So if I adjust my effect send here to minus like 8.53, when we go here, we can see this change. So this way we could have more, we could adjust the level of how much that send is triggering the sidechain. So it's just set for the effect send level here. So if it defaults to -12, it could be a preference or setting. So say when we come over, we say your default send level is, like here I have it to 0 dB, but if I have this set to -12, now when I create a sidechain, so I will just turn this off. So if we activate our sidechain here, we'll see that it'll generally, so when we see that, it's just the level of that particular send track that is going out. So as we would add ascend, we could set, a hotter level to the effect send. So this is just referencing the level of the send. So if I adjust this here, you'll see that this will automatically adjust my send level here. So it's just indicating what the gain stage going into the sidechain input is. All right, wonderful. CJVI on. All right, Miles from Colorado says, on Windows 11, when I record, say, YouTube using loopback on my Mode 2 M4, when I start recording in Cubase and start the YouTube audio, when I switch back to Cubase, it has stopped recording. I have to start recording again to capture YouTube. Is there some setting I'm missing to keep Cubase recording? So try this. Try go to your studio menu, to your studio setup, and then you'll see, try toggling this setting. So if you select your audio system at the very top in the left-hand column, try toggling release driver when application is in the background. So just try toggling that. So if it's checked, uncheck it. If it's unchecked, checked, and see, and that will probably clear that up for you. So again, studio menu, studio setup, and then release driver when select audio system and toggle that setting right here, release driver when application is in background. Okay. Right, reading through comments. Sorry. All right, Keith Vance asks, are other people continuing to have CPU spike issues? I've tried a bunch of suggestions, so annoying. So I don't, there's, it could be, so let us know, like, if it's, so when you're having, there's a difference between CPU spikes and audio performance spikes, all right? So it could be that, if we have one audio track that has 16 inserts on it, that one audio track can, because it's running in serial processing with all the inserts, that all has to be done on one processing core. So if you had like a track that was broken down 16 times and had one insert each, that could be allocated across different CPU cores. But, if you have one track, out of 20 that is causing one of your CPUs to overload, that will affect your audio performance. So, the audio performance and CPU performance are kind of different functions, and every DAW basically will work the same way because it's processing everything on that same, serially. So it's going to be all handled on the processor. So it could be that, how your project is set up, if you have one virtual instrument that is playing 16 different instruments and you don't have a way of allocating those different instruments to multiple CPU cores, that one instrument, just having it open with all those instruments, may give you a really high audio performance, but you look at it on the computer CPU performance, it's like, oh, it's not utilizing all the cores. It is, but it can't utilize multiple cores from a single audio track. So if you give us a little more detail on, if you're running Mac or PC, and if you want to share a project, you could share a project with me. You don't have to send any audio files, and I could see what effects plugins and how your project is set up. You could feel free to share that with me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. right. See, John Costigan is happy with his cherry cordial ice cream flavor. All right, Carlos Hoyos Restrepo says, "Hi everybody. How can I change different scale modes in chord pads, region, or chord assistant?" All right, so let's come over. Let's open up. Just jump to a particular chord track here. All right, so say I have this chord progression, which probably looks like we're in D major, and let me put a chord progression that looks like we're going to be in D minor. Let's do A minor here, just make it interesting. All right. All right, so we come over to A minor. Let's make this D minor. All right, and let's make it like a B diminished chord here. All right. All right, so now when we come over here, we could see, okay. All right, so let's say I have this. I want to adjust my automatic scales. All right, so let's say I want this to be a natural minor. Okay, so now when I come over here, so we could see that we're going to have, all right, let me just reread it here. Okay, so now that I've taken off automatic chords, so when we're putting in notes, we're not restricted. We can put any chord in, so we're not going to be restricted, by the editor. And when we go to the chord assistant here, so let's say we go to the chord assistant and I look at the list, we can say, okay, C major is a good chord between A minor and D minor. So if I come here, I could select that. So that's actually going to be not necessarily looking at the key, but looking at the chord before and the chord after. So we could determine that. So when we go to your proximity, we could see that. So if I click here for a chord, we can see that we're in D major, where we have this chord region defined as A minor. When we want to go to a chord, we can see that as kind of the root key, or we could see that based on the circle of fifths. So when we select chords here, so you can manually add your own scales, and then those choices will reflect based upon the scales that you've added right here for the chord suggestions. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, Balsa asks, can you show how to create a MIDI logical editor that offsets notes based on their velocity? If a note is 0 through 64, then offset, delay those notes by 330 milliseconds, 65 to 100, 250 milliseconds, 101 to 127, 100 milliseconds. All right, so let's take a look at it. All right, so I'll just do a quick step entry here. All right, so we have some notes here. All right, and let's adjust some of the velocities. Okay, so let's say these first couple notes will be around 41. Let's say these notes I want to be like around 70, and these notes about 117. All right, so we want to offset notes based on their velocity value. So let's take a look. So let's go to the MIDI. So we have to do this as 3 separate logical editors that we could define together in a macro, but we could show you. So let's go to the logical editor. Let's go to setup. So we're going to say we want to transform type is equal to notes, the velocity. So I just clicked on insert. The velocity is inside range 0 through 64. Let me just read. All right, so 0 through 64. Okay, so we'll say not pitch. So we'll say 0 to 64. Okay, and what we want to do is to take their position and subtract. And we could say, I think we have milliseconds, so let's say we want to do 333 milliseconds. Okay, so now all these notes are perfectly on the grid. So these notes between 0 through 64, which should be this first batch, we can shift 333 milliseconds. So let's go ahead and save this as a preset. So we'll say June 10th. We'll say 0 to 64. Okay, so now we want to set a value to 65 through 100. Let me make sure. And we'll do 250 milliseconds. All right, so if we do that, we'll see those notes shift over. All right. So we'll say, I'm sorry, here we'll choose 65 through 100. Okay, so those will shift 250. All right, so we'll say okay, so now we want to set this to 101 through 127, and we want these to be 100 milliseconds. Okay, so we'll save this as a preset. Okay, so now I'm going to come over here. Let's make a macro. So let's go to the key commands. We'll make a new macro. And we'll go for June 10th. All right, so I'm going to add these 3 commands to the macro. Okay, so now close this. So let's go ahead and run the macro. So the lower velocity notes will be over more. The mid-range velocity notes will be 250 milliseconds. The higher velocity notes will be 100. So run the macro, and we could see that each of those, the distance between this and the grid is smaller than this range, and this range is smaller than that range. So again, if we go to the logical editor, we could just kind of do these 3 different settings. So you want to say type is equal, velocity is inside the range, set the range. You want to make sure that transform is selected, adjust the position, choose subtract, switch to parameter 2 to show seconds. You can do frames or PPQ. Put those 3 presets in a macro, and then you could have all sorts of fun with that. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Balsa. All right, Julio Boobzilla asks, thanks, Greg. In the G minor scale, in your example, the independent project key setting next to the color palette, also the chord pads, key songs are a little confusing with major minor. So when we look at like our project root key setting here, so when we say, okay, our project root key here, so this is going to be more for like auditioning different loops. So, this is a project root key, so it doesn't differentiate between major or minor. And when we go to our chord pad settings here, this is just kind of the root key. So, when we do this, if it's like a minor scale or a major scale, we can see that this will automatically just kind of maintain the chordal relationships, but change kind of the root note. So, here and here, these are just root notes, and they're not determining major or minor. And if you wanted to set major, minor, or different musical modes, then you could do that within the chord track itself. But these are just going to be set up for only kind of the root note of the chords or the key. So these don't differentiate between major or minor. Hence project root key, chord pad root key. All right, Matt Elston says, hello, Greg. Just a quick hardware question, please. Cubase 14 Pro, Windows 11 Pro. I have a Steinberg UR816C, which I'm extremely happy with. Can I use another ADAT connection to add 8 in and 8 out? Many thanks. So with the UR816, you're going to have 8 analog mic pre's, 8 analog outputs, maybe 10 analog outputs. I never got one of the interfaces, always wanted one. And then if you want an additional 8 channels, you could connect a converter or another audio interface from ADAT light pipe connections in and out to get an additional 8 inputs and 8 outputs via the ADAT light pipe. So that's a way to expand, to add additional inputs and outputs. So you could have 16. So if you got another UR816, you could connect and have 16 mic preamps, where one is basically functioning as the audio interface, and the other UR816C is functioning as a converter that's expanding the inputs and outputs when connected via ADAT light pipe to the first UR816C. Right. Reading through comments. All right. Okay. Looks like Radar the Band has maybe a gig coming up. All right. All right, so we see from Miles that changing the release driver setting worked. Thanks again. So thanks for letting me know. Okay, so we see Pablo from Galicia, España, the highly regarded drummer of Hot Mess, is joined the live stream, and everyone's happy. He's saying hola to everyone. All right, Neil Dollar Real Deal asks on Cubase 12 how to change desktop speakers to speaker recording monitors. So when you're, it could really depend on, so when you're going to like different desktop speakers, so it could, often if you're using your desktop speakers, if you get to your studio setup, we would say, okay, I go to my audio system and I would choose built-in audio, and that would switch it to my built-in speakers. Now, my built-in audio, so it depends if you're running Mac or PC. So let's say let's switch it to built-in audio, and if I had something connected to the built-in audio, like if I wanted to take a line from the headphone output or the audio output of the laptop to speakers, like, going like an 1/8" mini jack, you may have to go to the control panel and tell it like what, okay, instead of the speakers, send the audio to the headphone output here. A lot of people, when you're using external studio speakers, have an audio interface, and selecting the audio interface that's connected to the powered speakers will do the trick. But if you're using kind of the built-in cable, you may have to select like, the generic ASIO latency or the Steinberg generic latency ASIO driver, and then go into the control panel and tell it to send the audio, not to the speakers, but to the headphone outs or to the line level outputs here. And it could be slightly different on Mac or PC, but the same principles will apply. All right. So we see Pablo just says, thanks, Greg, for the last Hangout answers. You're welcome. Enjoyed playing bass with your drumming over the weekend. All right, so we see from Durface says experiencing issues on Windows 11 with Intel. Install park control, CPU parking. Windows 11 switches cores on the fly, which doesn't work well with audio. So, Cubase, since version 12, will automatically utilize like all of your efficiency and performance cores. So I don't think that you have to do anything like, using park control for that. So I think with 11 and earlier, it didn't utilize all of the CPU cores, but I think it's 12, since 12 or 13, that it does, and you don't have to do anything special to take advantage of that. So you might be kind of working against yourself by having the park control enabled. All right, so we see from Ball says, hi Greg, any reasons why Talkback mic is not audible? Mic input is selected in control room, audio connections, Talkback button is on, Talkback metering is moving and showing signal but no sound. All right, so are you sending the talkback to like a headphone, like someone that's monitoring in headphones? And if that's the case, so let's say if we come over here and we go to, let's say your Q mixes. So let's say, okay, I go to my Q mix for my drummer. You have to make sure that when you come over here that the talkback is enabled in the individual headphone. So if we come over here, we could just say, okay, when we come over, so if you're utilizing the talkback, at this point, you want to make sure that the talkback is enabled in the control room for each one. This way you could say, you could go to the drummers and say, the guitar player, so the guitar players might talk back. We're not communicating with them to the talkback, but you can say, can you give the guitar player a cue because they keep missing their entrance? Can you give them a nod? And they go, okay. And then you could say, hey, check out that entrance. Maybe you can watch the drummer, see if he gives you a cue. So, make sure that the talkback is enabled in the control room. So you could turn it on here, but the intention of the talkback is to communicate to the individual musicians in their cue mixes. So once we do that, we can just come over here and make sure that the talkback is enabled for each of the different musicians. If you just kind of come over here and turn the talkback mic on in the main section, you probably won't hear it. It's intended to be where the talkback is utilized for the cue mixes in the control room. So let me know if that makes sense, Balsa. All right. You see Uno Momento says Elvis. All right. Michael Teams is happy that Pablo is on. Says Boom Boom Vasquez is here. All right. Pablo has a few questions, but he forgot them. So you have to write those down. Come on. All right. All right. So Balsa just says, Greg, thanks for the velocity delay, logical editor, presets, and macro. Your Cubase knowledge is astounding. The level of customization in Cubase is amazing. It says, do other DAWs have MIDI and project logical editor? So I don't really know any other DAWs. So if they did, I know Cubase has been doing it since like version 2 on the version 1 on the Atari. So I think the whole concept is really pioneered by Steinberg. So if they do, they probably copied it from Steinberg. All right, so you see Matt Elston says, thanks, Greg. That's fantastic. Appreciate your knowledge. So you're welcome. Always wanted to get a UR816C interface. Never got one. All right. All right, so we see Witty Music saying hello from Nashville. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see from Jazz Dude says, Greg, please show them how to really deactivate plugins in the insert chain. Okay, so let's say we have our latency monitor here. All right, so there's two ways. There's a bypass and a disable of plugins. So say if I am here and we go to my inserts, and let's go ahead and add a vocal chain. All right, so let's say when we do this, we see my plugin, the latency of this plugin is 238 milliseconds. So if I bypass the plugin, all right, so we come here, we bypass the plugin. The plugin doesn't process the audio, but the latency is still there. But if I come here and hold down the Alt or Option key, now when we turn this on, so there's kind of 3 stages. The plugin is active and sounding. We bypass, the plugin is still there, and it's still taking processing power, but it's not sounding the processing. It's still taking latency away. Then holding down Alt or Option, we could bypass the plugin, and as we bypass, it's going to take it out of the signal path entirely so that we can have no latency imposed by the plugin. So when we come here, we could turn it off and on. So bypass still has the latency, and the intention of that is, okay, I want to turn this on and off quickly without having any interruptions to the audio engine. And if I don't want that plugin taking any processing power or adding to additional latency, then I can hold down the Alt or Option, and we can see that the latency disappears. So each plugin could have up to 3 different steps or stages. One where it's processing the audio and adding latency. One where we take the audio processing off, but the latency is still there, so we could quickly turn it off and on for a quick comparison. And then one where the latency is just bypassed, or it's just disabled, so no additional latency hit. All right, wonderful to see Diamond District Studios. And his question is, I burn my effects into my recordings through the input channel. Is there a way to measure the latency introduced through this process? Okay, so let's come over. Let's say if we have our mix console here, and let's look at input channels. Okay, so let's say I'm tracking with an insert on this particular channel. So let's say we want to do something I can pitch correct, and I want, so now let's come over here, let's set up our sections. Okay, so let's see the channel latency. So right now we can see when we kind of click here in the settings cog, or click right here in this icon, we could activate the channel latency. So let's say, okay, now I want to add another plugin. Let's add a multi-band something. And I want, so now when we click here, we can see that this input chain has 163 milliseconds of latency. And if we click on the latency figure, we can see how much each plugin is causing in latency in milliseconds or samples as well. So you could just determine directly from there. So again, just go to the little kind of just to the right of the settings cogwheel here, and then you'll see the channel latency, and then on the input channels you could see exactly how much latency is on the input and how much, and if you click in the latency field, you can see how it's broken down for each particular plugin. All right, so we see Gary is here now, just saying hi, Greg. So thanks for joining us this afternoon or evening, wherever you're at. All right, so Tim K just says, my PC lets me use multiple audio drivers simultaneously. Cubase going through my audio interface, while others content, built-in video monitors, speakers, I could do it all, just one, of course, too. All right. All right, so we see from Duraface says, thanks Greg, I was having 45% CPU activity without even running channels before I started using the part control. Huge difference for my 2022 system. All right. Pablo is saying Michael Teams is famous. The best virtual ice cream distributor in the world. All right, so we see Gary is here now. Says, is there a way to easily replace an old instance of Contact with a newer version of Contact in an old project? I know about importing tracks from one project to another, but is there a better way? So plugin developers can choose to automatically, like when we have Howling and Sonic, when we went from Howling and Sonic SE3 to Howling and Sonic 7 as the default kind of instrument player in Cubase, we made the plugin automatically say, okay, if the plugin is calling for Howling and Sonic 3, have it automatically go to Howling and Sonic 7 if that's what is opened. So it's a choice that the plugin developer can make, whether they want it to automatically go to the latest version of the plugin or to the exact version of the plugin that was used originally for that particular sound. So it's really, so there's no automatic way of Cubase to do that. It's really up to the plugin developers. Many plugin developers will always have it, gravitate and open the latest version of the plugin, and that's a very convenient thing to do. But some plugin developers may choose not to do that, and that's their design decision. So if you want that, I would reach out to the plugin developer to see if they can make that work for you. All right, so we see Mark Raven says his dog Stella went swimming, and they're back at the studio, and Stella is wet and happy. So Bratman Studio says, is there a way to access the chat which has lots of info once the stream is over? So yeah, you could, let's go take a quick look. So let's say, come over here. We'll go to, all right, so let's say we go to the live chat. So let's say if we come over here, and then usually if you look in the right hand side, you can say show chat replay, and then wherever you're at, you could just come over here and see the chat as it plays. So again, just kind of come over, and you see on the right hand side, it could depend on which mode your YouTube is in. But if it's in kind of the default mode for me, then you could just simply show the chat replay, and as you kind of navigate to different areas, you could see the live chat is recorded with each live stream. Okay, read through comments. It's a great comment from Mark Graben. If Pink Floyd remade Ummagumma, says the song would be careful with that plug-in, Eugene. So. All right, so we see Audi and Lee asks, ASIO direct monitoring was a great option for PC to avoid latency while recording audio with plugins. How to get a similar result on Mac? So usually it's up, it's kind of an odd omission from Mac OS Core Audio that it doesn't have a direct monitoring mode, and I think their thinking was that, if the audio interface supports direct monitoring that you would do it within the control panel for the audio interface itself. So if you have an RME, you would go to like RME Total Mix and activate direct monitoring there. If you have, and we thought that was, and Steinberg took a different approach. And so if you have like a Steinberg audio interface, that we could turn direct monitoring off right here. And that's just with the Steinberg audio interfaces. So we kind of have maybe a different level of connection with those particular interfaces that allows us to do it, but it is kind of an omission from the core audio side on Apple. And if your audio interface supports it, you would probably have to go out to the control panel or the mixer applet for your audio interface and activate the direct monitoring there. It was kind of, I think, a bit of an odd and silly omission. Okay. See, Mark Rabin would say Michael Teams is famous, and so is Mia. Mia, and the best virtual ice cream of wild flavors, and he loves In-N-Out Burger. I think he's from Texas. I think he might be a Whataburger kind of guy. All right, so we see question from Gary is here now. It says, thanks, Greg. I feared that was the case. Native instruments are notoriously bad for their operation of updating contact. Crazy considering it's the foremost sampler in the world. Not sure if it's the foremost. It's popular, but yeah, it's kind of a silly thing. All right, and we see Durface also mentioning to Audi and Lee, says with modern audio interfaces, you can do direct monitoring in the audio interface itself, like UAD, ARMI, etc. All right, so you see Jazzu picked up an IXO 22. It was on sale in Germany at Thomann for 49 euros, so I bought one just for fun. Yeah, it's a great little interface. 49 bucks, can't pass that up, so. So we see from Mark Rabin, he's saying, yeah, Whataburger, I was mistaken, so. Yeah, In-N-Out's kind of LA. People in California all love In-N-Out, and Texas, it's Whataburger. East Coast, like we see a lot of people into Five Guys, and that's kind of spreading all over as well. All right, so let me jump back to some other questions that were mailed in. All right, so next question. How can you insert silence into a track at a certain loudness instead of the quiet sounds? Okay, so let me see. So when I think of this, I say, okay, we want to insert silence here. All right, so if we wanted to insert silence, you could go to just a straight ahead process would be just to kind of come over here and say, so we go to processes and we would say silence, and that would silence everything there. But I think, now I'm rereading the question. Let's say if we have a track kind of like this, where there's gaps in the track. So let's make this taller here. So if we wanted to insert silence at a certain loudness, so let's say I wanted to kind of break these. So I'm going to select this particular event. We'll go to audio, to advanced, and there's a detect silence function here. So what we could do is say, okay, at a particular threshold, we could say we now can automatically, so we could choose to calculate. So we could say, okay, minus 20.14 dB or whatever value you have. Now we could just come over here and add silence, and that would basically cut out the dead parts of the audio file right there. So if that's kind of what you mean, try going over to audio, advanced, detect silence. You could set your threshold, and you could listen to, so you could determine the number of sections. You could add these as regions. If we want to just strip the silence, just make sure that's checked, and then boom, all the parts will be silent like that. All right, next question. Groove Agent 6 or Spectral Layers 12 tomorrow? Can I upgrade to Groove Agent 6 from Groove Agent 5 on the dongle? And if can I use the Groove Agent 5 on the dongle too? So, Groove Agent 5 is already, migrated to the Steinberg licensing, and the Steinberg licensing will allow you to to run that license on 3 different computers. So, Groove Agent 5 was one of the programs that had migrated within its life cycle. So, if you did a voucher for it, I believe it moved the license to the Steinberg licensing system. And it's no longer on the USB e-licenser. So the USB e-licenser, the server was shut down on May 20th, so just about a month ago. And so no future products will be utilizing the e-licenser server. Everything since, 2022 has been migrated. Everything has been released. All new products are going to be on this Steinberg Steinberg licensing. So no longer utilizing the USB dongle. All right, let me see if there's any other live questions that have snuck in. All right, so we see that Jazz Dude got the white IXO22 for his Mac Mini, since Mac Mini doesn't have PCI slots. All right, Radar, the band, is now hungry to talk of different hamburger places. All right, so you see Gareth just says finally got all the bass parts for new Hot Mess release inserted. It says fantabulous. So, yeah, I hope they work out well. I should have maybe some of the other ones done maybe tomorrow or Thursday, hoping to get some more done. Then we'll start on side 2 over next weekend. See, Bratman Studio says LA is the home of In and Out. It's great, but just don't show up this week because of the different protests going on. I see like tear gas, pepper spray flavor. All right, so Balsa just says, hey, Greg, thanks for the Talkback tip. I do only have the master outs and no Q mixes, so your guess was right. My interface has one stereo out and one headphone out. They split with a headphone amp splitter. All right, so Gareth says, just did Everstar, which is one of the songs on the upcoming Hot Mess release. It says, loves it. All right, it's good. Okay, All right, so we see from Durface, it says, any way to do multiple channel routing assignments in one sweep? I know I can control shift, but what about many tracks with different routings? 01 to Dante 01, channel 2 to Dante 02. So yeah, it's going to be kind of just holding down the shift key. So let's say we do a new project here. Okay, and let's get to, we'll add 8 audio tracks here. Okay, and let's say I have, go to my inputs. All right, so let me just add buses here. And let's say we're going to add 8 mono inputs. Okay, so we could set the same input. So we're going to select all the channels here. So I could select the top and the bottom. And we'll hold down the shift key to do that. And hold down the shift key. And we'll say, okay, I want this to be mono in. And since all these are selected, we can see mono in. We get to the second channel, mono in. Let's see if I did it right. So it's usually the shift key. Make sure I have that. Yeah, so try just selecting all. And so if I want it all to be the same input, sorry about that. All right, so Alt and Option plus Shift will send them to all the same input, and usually Shift will just increment. So try just the Shift key. It's not working right now. Let me just check to see if there's a preference that changed. Yeah, so try like from this, I'll just see if this, that's the info line. Let me see if I can. But yeah, try just holding down the shift key, and the shift key should increment all of the routing for you. All right. Okay. All right, so we see from Johnny, I guess it's Johnny the Pig, when I'm trying to lock multiple hit points, I press Alt and Shift and drag the mouse over the hit points, but I get a lot more extra hit points than the ones I wanted to lock. All right, so let's take a look. Right here. All right. Okay, so let me just trying to lock multiple hit points. All right, so let me just make this a bit shorter. Okay, so let me just see if all right, so I'm here. Let me just hold down. Let me just see if we can make it larger here. All right, so when we all right, now let's see when we get to so when I'm doing it here, it doesn't seem like it's adding more hit points as we do it. So let me know if I'm doing something differently than you were doing. So let's say if we want to edit the hit points, I could come here and it's, all right, so we could, so I edited that hit point. Let's see if we can, I don't think I've locked hit points before, but let's say. Yeah, it doesn't seem like maybe I haven't really done this in a long time, but holding it down the right. So let me see if I need to select. But it seems like we could still move the hit points. You know, I think I locked them. I'll make a note of that for the next live stream. I'll play around with it some more so I can get more familiar with that. Sorry for not helping with that. But it doesn't seem like, Johnny, it's adding any for me. All right, so we see Mark Rabin says, I was just thinking as more of us are getting more competent with Cubase, maybe we could take a different spin on the live stream questions and live mixing. So Yeah, I'm always, whatever kind of topics you want. If you wanted like a specific, you could just ask a question in advance if you want to see something in particular, or if you want to share a project, and maybe we could have multiple people mix it and take approaches on it and see what they do. All right. Let's see, Randy just says, okay, once again, stop at the burger post. Now he's starving. All right. M Loud says, any special resonators in Cubase 14? So, there are, different plugins and different filters. So if you wanted to, come over to a particular track, if you wanted to, resonators can mean different things to different people, but if you wanted to have, different filters that could be applied, to add resonance or resonate on, particular frequencies. So there's a number of, if you want to do more filter, coming over to tone booster even. So you could just come over here and employ different filters. So if you wanted to come over here, let's just so a nice choice of different filters for adding resonance. Okay, see, Radar, the band has curbed it to talk of restaurants with having a Dr. Pepper. All right. See, Bratman Studio just says he bought Dr. Pepper baked beans. Sounds interesting. All right, wonderful CJ from Secret Studios. Thanks for joining us. All right, see Garrett just saying nice bit of a samba groove from Greg on Everstar. All right, Jay's question. Hi, Greg. Does Cubase Window have a tool which allows us to speed up or slow down segments of tracks with automation with effects that sound like record or tape slowdown effects? All right, so there's a couple different ways to approach something like that. The chorus of the song may be funny if you speak Spanish. All right. So let's say we have, let's say we have our project here. So a couple different approaches. So let's say I want to take this. And if we go to, let's go to inserts, and under other, there's a loop mash FX. So if you wanted to do, or if you want to change the so we could do something like that. Now we could also switch our algorithm to tape. So I'm going to do just a quick tempo detection of this project. All right. All right, and then I'm going to come right over here and let's just do set definition from tempo. We may not have to do this, but it'll take just a second. Okay, so now I'm going to open up a tempo. Let's say I take my tempo track here, and I'm going to put the algorithm here to tape. So let's say I want this roughly to be, I'll do a new tempo track version. Let's say 172. All right. So now if I wanted to just change the tempo, so let's say I just want that to quickly come over here, we could just say so if we wanted to just kind of to ramp down tempo wise, we could just come here. So you could automate a tempo change and do that, but another approach may be to just come over. So let's say I want to take this. So we could automate loop mash effects. We could probably do some stuff with like FX modulator. And let's just set like a pitch shift. And you could or just come here. So if you wanted to automate stuff like that, that's another approach that you could take, Jay. So let me know if that's helpful. Okay. My son just sounds like he just got home. He has one more day of school tomorrow. All right. Okay, Roland Stuff asks, hi Greg, I'm having difficulties auditioning samples, loops, and VSTs in the media bay without double clicking on them, which inserts them into the project. I'd be grateful for any guidance. All right, so let's say if we're going into different loops. So one is like if it's an audio sample, if we, make sure that you have like the, so, this changed slightly in 14. So if I come here, I may not hear the particular sample until, so let's say if we come over here, we may not hear it until the autoplay is turned on. So if the autoplay isn't enabled, you may double click and then you could hear the but if you come here, just make sure that the autoplay is turned on. And then that should automatically play. Now, if you're not hearing it, make sure, because generally these tracks don't have a home yet. So, but if you go to your studio menu to studio setup, at that point, we could just, or not to studio setup, but to your via audio connections rather. Sorry for my brain cramp. Make sure that you have the control room activated. So, because generally it's going to audition through the control room. So if I come over to my audio connections, let's go to the outputs. I have these deactivated since I generally use the control room. So you might be able to hear them right here. But generally, see if you have the control room activated as well. And then that will give you kind of its own monitoring volume that's independent. So we activate the control room, make sure that the output routing is set here, that we could, and then we could adjust the volume. So, and also just make sure that you have that turned on, because it should be able to easily kind of preview right there. Jazz Dude brings up a great point that retro log, you could sidechain audio into that. All right, so we see from Johnny the Pig says about the hit points, I'm making MIDI notes for a blast beat drum part. It's boring to have to lock each point manually instead of just dragging the mouse over every hit point you want to lock. I'll just try it one more time, maybe on a different part, and I'll play around with it some more. But let's say if I'm here and I have my hit point editors, so yeah, I'll play around with that some more for Friday's live stream. And if you want to send me an email, I'll make a note for that to see if I can figure out the better workflow for that. All right. All right. Balsa asks, can audio events that I drag and stacked over each other as different takes turn into track lanes? Now when I open track lanes, all of them are stacked on one lane instead of under each other. So it could be, let's say if I want to take like this piano and I drag it on top, I drag this sample on top. Okay, so now when I come over here and I go to lanes, let me just check one preference that could affect this. This could be under editing. So it could be delete overlaps. Let me just check. I'll just do a new project here. right, so let's say. Okay, because we could have delete overlaps on, but let me just see if I... Let's see if we do it with lanes open. So if you record on, but let's see if I just... All right, so if I just had the lanes open, we could drag to different lanes. And a new lane's automatically created as soon as... So I guess you could drag to open lanes, otherwise it could just all be... But if it's recorded on top of themselves, then they would show up in lanes. All right, so we see from Batman Studios, says Greg, loop mash is great, quick and easy. Can you program the amount of slowdown? So when you're working with loop mash, there's going to be different settings. So let's say if we go to the inserts, we go to tools, or under other rather, to loop mash. You'll see like different, so this will be kind of timed. So you could say, okay, I have a half note, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, and these will determine kind of the length of the basis for the different divisions and lengths of the particular samples, or like the effects as they work. So you'll see these options right here. So there's 4 different rhythmic choices that will be synced to the project tempo. All right, Raw Justice Hip Hop's just checking in for the last few minutes from Capitol Heights. He's had a long, busy day. All right. So Bratman Studio just says FX modulator, amazing. So many things I need to try. Thanks. All right, so Gareth is approaching bedtime. All right, so it's late there, so it's about 10:34. All right, Justin Gambino says, does Cubase have its own version of the Ableton arpeggiator? Been trying to figure out how to recreate an effect in Cubase, but I'm at a loss a little bit. So it might be just the Arpeggi plugin. So let's just come over here. So I'm not familiar if it's just like a MIDI arpeggiator plugin, but if you just kind of come right over here, so let's say we go to like a synth bass part here. So if you go to under MIDI inserts, there's 2 different arpeggiators. So if you go to like Arpeggi SX, now when I play a chord, so just open up the virtual keyboard. So here we could say, okay, I want this to be 8th notes, but maybe I want them to be held by quarter notes. And we can say, okay, I want this to be different presets for how the notes should arpeggiate. And you could also just go through different presets. So if you want kind of different classic arpeggiators, and you could drag and drop your own. And these could function kind of in real time, so it could affect the... So if we come here, So I'm holding a chord here, and now it's a chord that's being processed. But if I move this little line down here, now when I record, it's actually recording the arpeggio to the event. So now we can see that the actual event has been kind of recorded. Like the output of the arpeggiator has been recorded into Cubase, whereas this would record just the kind of the chords that are processed in real time through the arpeggiator, or the arpeggiator can be printed. The effects of the arpeggiator can be printed into the MIDI track. So let me know if that's kind of like the Ableton arpeggiator. I'm not familiar with it. All right, so we see from Roland's stuff, he didn't have autoplay selected for auditioning samples in the media bay. So glad you're one mouse click away from happiness there. All right. Read through comments. All right, so we see from Justin, says it's like a slowdown and speed effect with the arpeggiator, which doesn't look like Max or Live stuff. Says I used the modulators to try and do it with the LFO linked. Did a volume of an audio clip, but it just didn't sound right. So yeah, I mean, if you have like, so let's say I want to take this arpeggiator and let's assign a module. So on this track, I'm going to put like a volume plugin. And we could go to our modulators here. So let's say, okay. So let's say, okay, I want this to be 2 measures. If we want that to be softer. So you could do stuff like that with you. But if you have like an example, I'm sure we could probably recreate something similar in Cubase. All right. All right, so we see from Justin, just says, oh, that's a cool feature recording from the MIDI in. All right, I think we had one last question that was mailed in. Let me get to that. All right, so a couple of questions here. Greg, I may be doing some work with a songwriter who's on Pro Tools. What is the best way to practice with integrating Cubase and Pro Tools? Like, what are the guys at Remote Control doing? So the guys at Remote Control that are using 2 systems, most of them are composing in Cubase, and they may play video from Pro Tools and capture the output from Cubase in Pro Tools. So kind of like a print rig, it's often called, but a lot of people are not doing that as much. I think it was kind of, as computers were slower, a way to kind of divvy different tasks. Most people, when they're working, will just simply, export stems or utilize like an AAF file format, so that as a translation protocol. I don't think Pro Tools supports DAW project yet format. If it does that, that would be very easy, and that allows us to have many people from Studio One and Bitwig enable them to switch to Cubase quite easily, because now they could export the projects as DAW project and import it directly into Cubase. All right, last question we had mailed in. For Cubase versions ago, the marker was updated, so it was shown through all tracks in the project window. Did the development really stop there and not complete the marker line also visible in the key editor? All right, so let's say we have markers here. So I want to come over. Let's drop some markers in. All right, now we could have, and let me just put some markers not in the grid here. So we'll put these markers in between. Okay. So now when we go to our preferences, and we go to settings, I think we go to event display to markers. We could kind of see the marker tracks through our project window here. So let's say, if we look at the lines, we could see kind of the active, so we could see these marker track lines appear directly kind of going throughout the whole project window. Now, if we want to see these in the editor window, what we could do is just double click, and let's go to the full screen editor, and we can see global tracks. So we can say, okay, let's look at our marker track. And now that we're in a full screen editor, because we could kind of get a sense when we synchronize the editors here where the markers are going. We don't see them here because in the lower zone, but in the full screen, we would go to, where it's often on a dedicated, screen by itself. You could go to the global tracks and then see the markers and just check the markers, and then you can see the marker track lines here indicated throughout the entire key editor window. So, and if you don't see it here, just make sure that you have this visibility checked here, and then you could just have the marker track directly there, and then all the marker tracks would be shown throughout the key editor. Great. Let's see if there's, all right, let me jump back to live questions. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. Anyone, if you want to send questions in advance, you could send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay. All right, so see, I think we are at the end of questions. We'll see if there's any more questions that people have that sneak in. If not, we'll end a couple minutes early. I want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions. I hope that everyone's learned a new tip or trick. And if you've learned something new, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. We'll be doing our next live stream on starting on Friday at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. All right, so we see, and Justin, if you want to, I saw that you sent it to the Discord, but if you want to email that YouTube link to clubcubase@steinberg.de, that'd be easier for me to find. So if you want to do that as well, that'd be great. All right, we see Tony Trunzo. All right, great to see Lucy Godfrey back on. Hope you're well. All right. We see Charles K. just says, thanks, Greg. Gerald Ely says, great job. All right. Bratman Studio said you had fun today. Hope your bro's appointment went well. All right, we'll give it our minute and see if any other questions sneak in. All right, there's usually about 20 to 30 seconds from when I talk to when you guys hear. So. All right, so it looks like we are out of questions. I want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see people back on Friday. Thank you so much. Goodbye.